I used to consider myself a pretty intelligent guy. As a teenager, you reach a point where you think you know enough about the world that you'll be able to navigate the perils of life easily, if only you could be given the chance. I don't feel that way anymore. I live in a very isolated area. Our property used to be a small part of a very large country club and golf course, which now sits abandoned. I'm used to being isolated because the view from any window in my house only showcases wide open fields, hills, and clusters of trees. I became used to taking my dog out all hours of the night without a leash, and just letting him run all over and bark his head off. I was never worried about bothering anyone, and even less worried about encountering anyone. One evening I was sitting in my living room at about 3 a.m. I had just finished watching a movie, and I was in that frame of mind where I was ready to head upstairs and go to bed. But I was too comfortable to move, so I just sat there scrolling through my phone absent-mindedly. The glow from my phone was the only light in the room, and I was only a few steps away from the back door, which was hardly ever locked. From the garage, I heard my dog start making noise. He gave a few deep, threatening barks, and then I heard him scratching at the carport door. For a few moments, I just ignored him, figuring that he caught the scent of a deer or something, and it would wander off. But the barking only intensified. Annoyed that he would wake up the whole house if he kept at it, I stood up and walked towards the garage door. The barking and scratching continued as I slid on my shoes and stepped into the garage. I flicked on the light. My dog was there, standing on his makeshift bed, but he wasn't anywhere near the carport door where the scratching noises were coming from. I paused, picked up a tennis ball and tossed it at the door, figuring that it would scare off whatever animal was on the other side. The tennis ball bounced softly off the surface and rolled into the corner, and then the scratching stopped. But my mind still wasn't put at ease. For starters, my dog hadn't instinctively bolted after the ball like he usually does, but instead he stood exactly where he was, still barking at the unseen thing. The second reason I didn't feel better was because the scratching sound didn't come to an abrupt, interrupted halt. It sort of slowed down, became softer, and then stopped. So it wasn't like the thing on the other side of the door was startled by the tennis ball. It was more like it was suddenly aware of my presence and choosing to stop on its own. After another moment, I got annoyed at myself for being as creeped out as I was. I figured that I would leash my dog to the wall, open the garage door, and really scare the thing off. I attached my dog to his leash, sat on the steps, and hit the button. The carport door started to rumble as it began to raise itself slowly, and the light from the inside illuminated the driveway. I was expecting to see something small dart off quickly, but one thing I definitely wasn't expecting to see was the outline of two human-like legs forming in the darkness as the door continued to rumble open. The legs didn't move at all in response. In fact, they remained as still as a marble statue. As the door kept rising, I saw the torso and the arms start to take shape. I honestly don't know how to describe them other than pale and rough. I didn't see any clothing, just an outline of a body. The first thing that popped into my mind was that creature with its eyes on its hands from Pan's Labyrinth. My dog was barking like mad and tugging on its leash, but before the door could lift itself any higher and reveal whatever was above the figure's shoulders, I smacked the button again. The door paused, and then slowly began to lower itself again. I stood frozen, not taking my eyes off the thing before the door slowly set itself down on the concrete. I immediately grabbed a hatchet off of the shelf, took my dog, locked the garage door, and went inside. 1,000 questions were assaulting me at once, the most prominent being what the hell that thing was out there. Was I in danger? And was I going crazy? I had just about made up my mind that it was some kind of trespasser playing a sick joke when I witnessed something that shot that theory down. When I got to the back door to lock it, I saw something tearing across the backyard on 2 legs, faster than I expect any human would dare to run in the dark. When it reached the low fence that surrounded our pool, it leapt forward into a dive, landed on its arms, and then continued to bound out into the darkness on all fours. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to tell the rest of my family. I knew how it would sound, and I knew that none of them would ever believe me. I examined the scratch marks on the door and the footprints in the grass, but nothing about them was so unusual that they would help to validate my account in any way. I don't know what to think anymore. I used to consider myself an intelligent person, but now, I'm terrified of something I can't explain. I don't feel safe in my own home anymore. What if that thing comes back? There is something in the woods behind my house. My sister was the first to see it months ago, stating that she saw it watching her from the tree line. But I blew it off as nothing. I imagine that most people would. There's not much to do out there. We can't get wireless internet or cell phone signal, so we mostly spend our time in town. A few weeks after she reported seeing this thing in our backyard, we were returning home from a night out. The garage door wasn't working, and we didn't feel like lifting the door manually. So we parked the car in the driveway and began walking up the path to the front door, and we both heard a noise. It was a deep, clear whooping cry. It didn't seem to be coming from the immediate area, but it was still far too close for my liking. "What the hell was that?" my sister asked in confused astonishment. I had no idea, but I was too tired to give it much thought. I quickly unlocked the front door to let us in. Once inside, it was easy just to dismiss it as nothing. We turned on the TV and air conditioning, and by the time we went to bed, I had completely forgotten about it. Maybe a week later, we were sitting around the back of our house at basement level under our deck. It was about 10 at night. There was barely any lights on in the house, and we were talking and smoking cigarettes. Had either of us remembered that noise we heard, we may have decided to smoke inside. From the distance, we heard the cry once more. And this time, I could definitely sense emotion to it. It sounded alarmed. My sister and I immediately went silent and then stood up. "Which direction is that coming from?" I asked. My sister put out her smoke and took a few steps forward. We then heard a shuffle of movement a few yards away in the trees. The shuffling turned into a loud snap, and we both booked it back inside. We locked the doors and turned off all the lights, and for a few minutes we tried to peer outside to catch a glimpse of what may have been watching us from the woods. But we didn't see anything. This time it was much harder to dismiss. The following Wednesday after the incident, I was home by myself. I remember the day of the week because my sister was at the gym. It was just starting to get dark when I went out and sat down under the deck again for a smoke. Because there was still daylight in the sky, my nerves were calm. I wasn't worried about seeing or hearing anything. So far, we had only heard those weird cries late at night. I had mentioned to my sister that we should put some motion sensor lights back there, but we both knew that we wouldn't follow through on that. I was just sitting there in the silence, looking at the trees as I smoked, and thinking about what was in the fridge. And that's when my eyes caught something, and before I knew what I was looking at, my body tensed up. There was a short figure crouched in the trees peering out at me. I could just make it out through the shadows as it leaned forward through the trees. I didn't take my eyes off of it, and I was careful to only make slight movements, as to not reveal to the thing that I saw it. I watched it shift its weight and turn its head slightly, and that's when I saw the faint glow of two glassy yellow eyes beneath its hair. I'm not sure how long I stared at it, maybe 2 minutes or so, but my cigarette burnt out, and when I set it down, the creature vanished back behind the tree. I then heard a very faint rustling of the leaves. The rustling was so soft I wouldn't have paid any attention to it otherwise. I stood up and tried to find it again, but I couldn't. After another moment, I heard something cry out in the darkness. I wasn't surprised by it this time. It was almost like I was expecting it. I went back inside and locked my door. I immediately began to feel uneasy. Not having my eyes on the thing made me nervous. I grabbed my dad's old shotgun from the closet and sat in the living room staring at the backyard until my sister came home. I then told her about my experience. Most of you may think that I saw some kind of monkey in the trees, but what type of monkey has eyes that glow yellow in the dark? It's only a guess, but we think whatever I saw in the trees is young and curious and was trying to get a look at us. And that whooping cry that we hear might be its parent calling out to it that it's time to come home. Back in April of 2013, I was vacationing with my friend on the St. Johns River Delta, which is a system of several rivers that branch out all over eastern Florida. After a day of kayaking, we returned to my sailboat to spend the night on the mattress benches in the cabin. We settled in at about 10 p.m., and even though my friend passed out quickly, I had a hard time drifting off to sleep because of the sound of rain pattering on the cabin roof above me. I couldn't determine exactly why, but once the sun had gone down, I no longer felt safe. That didn't make any sense to me, as I had been coming out to the river delta to camp for years, and I had never felt a discomfort quite like this before. It was as though I missed something obvious and potentially dangerous, and my mind was keeping me on high alert. At about 3 in the morning, I awoke from a light sleep for apparently no reason. There hadn't been any loud sound from outside, and the boat hadn't shaken or been rocked in any way. Still, I decided to peer outside the porthole that faced the entrance to the canal. The feeling that something wasn't right was still there. That's when my eyes fell upon a dark figure at the far side of the river. Its body was outlined by the glow of a distant street lamp. I felt shocked, but not surprised. I had almost known that something was going to be there. The figure made its way into the water and started swimming towards the boat in a stealthy, silent way. It barely made a ripple across the water as it approached. I suddenly started wondering if the thing was even human. I considered my options as I began to panic. The cabin of my boat had no weapons of any kind, and the closest shelter that we could make for was at least 100 yards away from our position. I was terrified to do it, but I took my eyes off the creature and turned around to shake my friend. It took an irritatingly long time to get her to stir, and every second lost felt like another nail on my coffin. When she finally opened her eyes and sat up, 2 things happened. The first, her eyes went about as wide as I've ever seen a pair of human eyes could get as she looked over my shoulder. And the second, I heard 2 small thumps and the faintest sensation of the boat tipping sideways. I turned to see the creature staring directly at us through the glass. It had a lizard-like face with a long snout. I remember that clearly because it had to tilt its head downward to press its face to the porthole. It had 2 extremely large, amber-colored eyes positioned on either side of its head, and it was staring at us in the same way I suspect a cat eyeballs 2 goldfish in a bowl. Its arms were raised above its head, and it seemed likely those 2 thumps I had heard before were the sounds of it resting its hands against the edge of the deck to steady itself. It stared at us in silence, and we stared right back. I kept whispering in a frantic, pleading tone to my friend not to scream or make any sounds that may startle it. After what felt like 5 minutes, the creature either grew bored of us or simply lost its grip and sank back into the water. For a few moments I was terrified that it would circle the boat, climb up on deck, and come at us from the doorway. But after it sank into the mucky water, I never saw it reappear. We were so terrified of a potential trap and being caught by that thing in the darkness, we lay awake shaking and terrified until 9 a.m. when the sun was nice and high, and made a dash to shore, then to our car. I haven't seen the creature since, but after that incident, I've been terrified of any water that isn't clear enough to see something coming towards you from under the surface. I would have said that I was dreaming or hallucinating, but my friend saw the exact same thing, and she refuses to speak about it to this day. I think she is trying to forget it ever happened, and I have no idea what it was we saw, but I have a feeling that when it swam off, it didn't go far.